When most people think of the Victorian era, they picture fancy clothes and fancy hairstyles, but spoiler alert, Victorian England actually smelled worse than a porta potty in July, and that's just the beginning. Forget the powdered wigs and corsets. Behind the glam was a reality that was disgusting, disease-ridden, and seriously stinky. It was a world full of filth, funk, and frequently questionable choices. From once-a-month sponge baths to exploding toilets, we're diving nose-first into the grimy truth about hygiene in the 1800s. We'll explore how they bathed or didn't, the disgusting smells they dealt with, and how women managed to wear those gigantic hoop skirts without any toilet paper in sight. Trust us, once you learn about their struggles, you'll never complain about public restrooms again. Before we plunge into the sewer, don't forget to subscribe and give this video a like. We're almost at 1,000 subscribers, and your support keeps the nasty stories coming. Most Victorians thought that taking too many baths was not good for your health, so they didn't. Because of this, many people only bathed once a month or even less, especially during the cold winter months. Heating water meant building fires, carrying heavy buckets, and maybe borrowing the same tub your dad and 5 siblings already used. Yep, bath water was shared. Dad usually went first to wash, followed by mom, then the children, and the baby would go last. Public bathhouses were a thing, but water got recycled until it looked like beef stew. Poor families didn't have a bathtub at all. Instead, they washed in rivers, ponds, or rain barrels, if they remembered to wash at all. Some people cleaned themselves just by wiping with a damp cloth. This was called sponging off. But even then, most people still smelled bad. The streets of cities like London smelled bad too. Even Queen Victoria, the Queen of England, preferred a weekly sponge bath over a real soak. She liked to wash once a week with a sponge instead of full baths. People covered the funk with perfume or just powered through with powder. Underwear was worn for weeks without washing. People wore the same wool suits many times without cleaning them. Families often shared undergarments, especially among siblings. Gross, right? Women wore wool, petticoats, corsets, and crinolines, trapping layers of sweat, blood, and pee underneath. Delightful. Soap was harsh and expensive. Soap was made of animal fat and lye. It stung and stripped your skin. Cities lacked sufficient water, so clothes were boiled, beaten, and dried in grimy courtyards. Laundry soap was pricey, so people used milk or urine to bleach clothes. Not a typo. Urine. Victorians fought grease or oil stains by rubbing chalk into fabric. For grass and blood stains, kerosene, no deodorant, no daily showers, just layers of wool and sweat. So how did they handle the stink? Deodorant wasn't invented until 1888. Instead, people rubbed on vinegar, orange peels, or baby powder and called it a day. Linen undergarments absorbed sweat and were aired out, not washed between uses. Body odor was accepted as normal, together with sweat-soaked wool. In crowded places like streets, factories, or dance halls, the smell was overwhelming. Victorian dental hygiene was quite rough and not at all pleasant. People used tooth powder to clean their teeth, and the recipes were pretty gross. This toothpaste substitute was often homemade or bought from stores, and it was made from strange things like chalk, salt, soot, crushed brick, charcoal, and sometimes even the powder from cuttlefish. Not exactly what you'd think of for a fresh breath. The toothbrushes back then had bristles made from boar hair attached to handles made of bone or wood. There were no fancy things like fluoride toothpaste, mouthwash, or dental floss to help keep teeth clean. Dentists were hard to find. Plus, dentists were terrifying. No numbing, no modern tools, just yank and pray. Most people only went to the dentist if they had terrible pain. Wealthy folks sometimes wore false teeth made from animal bones, ivory, or even real human teeth they got from grave robbers. It was pretty common for people to steal teeth from graves. By the time you hit your 30s, you might be missing half your teeth and have breath that smelled like you'd eaten coal. Not a very pretty picture. Back in the day, having indoor plumbing was a real treat. Most homes didn't have proper toilets. Instead, families used chamber pots, which were basically bowls kept under beds or hidden in corners. Once full, it was dumped into the street with a friendly shout, "Gardaloo!" Translation: watch out, flying pee and poop inbound. This meant the streets were often like open sewers, especially in places like London, and they smelled terrible from urine, human waste, and rotting garbage. Rich homes had early flush toilets, but those dumped waste into basement cesspits. Even those weren't perfect. They could overflow and make homes smell really bad too. For most people, using a filthy outhouse, sharing a cesspit with neighbors, or heading to a public restroom that was hardly ever cleaned was the norm. And guess what? Toilet paper wasn't made for the masses in Britain until the 1880s. Before that, people had to get creative and use things like leaves, rags, corn cobs, old newspaper scraps, their hands, or anything else they could find. In public restrooms, there might even be a communal sponge on a stick that everyone had to share. Yuck! Just think about hundreds of people using the same gross cesspit in the hot summer. It was truly awful. In the summer of 1858, London didn't just smell bad. It stank so horribly that it shut down the British government. We're talking about the Great Stink, a disaster so gross, so smelly and so dangerous, it changed London forever. It all started with the River Thames. For centuries, people dumped everything into it: human waste, dead animals, factory chemicals, even rotting meat from butchers. Back then, there was no real sewer system. Rich or poor, your toilet basically led straight into the river. In June and July of 1858, a brutal heat wave hit London. Temperatures soared, and with no rain to flush it away, the river turned into a giant open sewer, baking in the sun. The stench was described as unbearable horror. People were terrified that just breathing the air would kill them. Inside the Houses of Parliament, lawmakers couldn't even do their jobs. The stink was so strong they soaked the curtains in lime and vinegar to block the smell, but nothing worked. The situation was deadly serious. People were dying from cholera, typhoid, and dysentery, diseases linked to contaminated drinking water from that same river. Londoners were living surrounded by rot, decay, and disease. The river wasn't just gross, it was murderous. Enter Joseph Bazalgette, a brilliant engineer. He had a plan to fix it all. A brand new sewer system that would carry waste far away from where people lived and drank. It was massive, expensive, and revolutionary, and Parliament finally gave him the green light. Why? Because the stink forced them to act. Bazalgette's system not only cleaned the Thames, it saved lives. Parts of it are still in use today. And London? It finally stopped smelling like a toilet. Sewers were full of methane gas. One stray match could blow your loo sky high. Toilets exploded. Cesspits collapsed. Rats crawled through pipes and ended up in kitchens or worse. Beds, spreading germs everywhere. Public toilets and outhouses often had no safety barriers, making it easy for kids to fall in and drown in the disgusting mess. Sanitation workers, known as night soil men, had the grim job of cleaning these cesspits by hand. It was super dangerous and disgusting, and they didn't get paid much at all. Diseases like cholera and typhoid were everywhere, especially in places where many families had to share one filthy toilet. Back in the Victorian era, people barely washed their hair, maybe just once a month. Can you imagine that? They didn't have nice shampoos like we do today. Instead, they used weird stuff like vinegar, rum, or even raw egg yolks to try and clean their hair. If they needed a quick fix between washes, they'd sprinkle dry shampoo made from flour or cornstarch right onto their scalp. Haircuts? Forget it. Women especially loved their long hair, even if it was dirty. Long, unwashed hair was all the rage, but let's be real, it was super gross. And guess what? Fleas and lice were everywhere. People wore little boxes with honey or blood to lure bugs off their heads. Hairbrushes? They were shared by everyone in the family and hardly ever cleaned, making the lice problem even worse. If someone wore a wig, it was like a cozy home for lice, fleas, and mites. Talk about a messy situation. Women desperately wanted to achieve a pale, ghostly glow, so they used dangerous powders made with lead, mercury, and arsenic. These toxic ingredients could cause terrible sores on their skin, damage their brains, and even turn their teeth black. To make their eyes look bigger and more striking, they used deadly belladonna eye drops that made their pupils dilate. But this risky beauty trick could sometimes lead to blindness. Mercury was often used to treat syphilis, but, unfortunately, it was so poisonous that it would sometimes kill people faster than the disease itself. Doctors of that time were often clueless about germs. They would go straight from cutting open dead bodies to delivering babies without washing their hands. Hospitals were disgusting places, surgical tools were not cleaned, and doctors wore bloody aprons like they were trophies. Doctors didn't believe in germs. They'd cut a corpse, then deliver a baby without washing hands. And the medicine? Mercury for STDs, which often killed faster than the disease. When someone died, their body would be kept at home for wakes that could last for days with no refrigeration. Families sometimes sat down to eat dinner right next to the corpse, turning a blind eye to the horror beside them. Horse-drawn carriages filled the streets, but they came with a big problem. Tons of manure piled up every day. There were no trash cans anywhere, so people just tossed their garbage, old bones, and spoiled food right into the streets. Slop buckets full of waste were dumped into dark alleyways. When it rained, the streets turned into a nasty, brown, slippery soup that everyone had to walk through. Kids played in this gross mess and then brought the dirt and filth back into their homes. Drinking water came from rivers and wells, often filled with sewage or decaying bodies. Yuck! Bodies were often buried close to these water sources, leaking into what people drank. Amazingly, they drank this filthy water every single day without realizing how dangerous it was. So, how does Victorian hygiene stack up against today's standards? Let's just say that your daily shower would make you feel like royalty in the 1800s. From lice-filled wigs to rivers full of poop, the Victorians lived in a world that was equal parts elegance and excrement. If you learned something new, leave a comment with the grossest fact you heard today and subscribe. We're close to 1,000 subscribers, and every click makes a difference. Thanks for joining this grimy journey into the past. Stay curious and stay clean.